The church was quiet, except for the soft hum of the organ playing a sad tune. Rows of people, dressed in black, filled the pews. Lily, a bright-eyed 10-year-old girl, sat next to her father, James. Her hands clutched a small stuffed bear that her grandmother had given her. She looked small and out of place among the serious adults around her. James sat stiffly, his hands folded tightly in his lap. He glanced down at Lily, who was unusually quiet. Normally, Lily would have been fidgeting or asking questions, but today she stared straight ahead, her big brown eyes fixed on the large wooden casket at the front of the room. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" James whispered. Lily nodded but didn't take her eyes off the casket. "Grandma doesn't look happy," she said softly, almost to herself. James frowned. He didn't understand what she meant. "Lily, it's just a sad day. Everyone feels like that right now." Lily didn't respond. Instead, she hugged her bear tighter and kept staring. The minister began the service, talking about Lily's grandmother, a kind woman who had been loved by everyone in the small town. He spoke about her love for baking cookies, planting flowers, and always being the first to help anyone in need. People nodded and smiled faintly, remembering all the good things about her. But Lily didn't smile. She shifted in her seat, biting her lip like she was holding back something important. As the service continued, James noticed Lily glancing around the room, her expression growing more worried. She leaned closer to James and whispered, "Daddy, I need to tell you something. It's about Grandma." James sighed. "Lily, not now. We'll talk later, okay?" "But it's important," she insisted, tugging on his sleeve. James put a finger to his lips, signaling her to be quiet. People were starting to look their way. Lily slumped back in her seat, frustrated but silent. The service ended, and everyone slowly made their way outside for the burial. The crisp autumn air greeted them, leaves crunching underfoot as they walked to the gravesite. Lily held James's hand tightly, her little feet dragging as if she didn't want to go. As they reached the gravesite, Lily tugged on James's arm again. "Daddy, please listen. I talked to Grandma last night." James stopped walking and knelt to her level. "Lily, Grandma is not here anymore. What you had was probably a dream, honey. It's okay to miss her, but she can't talk to you now." Lily's eyes widened, and she shook her head. "It wasn't a dream. She told me something bad happened." James's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice low so others wouldn't hear. "She said someone hurt her," Lily whispered, clutching her bear even tighter. James felt a chill run down his spine. He opened his mouth to respond but was interrupted by the minister calling everyone to gather around. "Lily, we'll talk later, okay?" James said quickly, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. But as the ceremony continued, James couldn't get her words out of his head. The burial ceremony was short but emotional. People wept softly as the casket was lowered into the ground. James tried to focus on the minister's words, but Lily's earlier comment kept replaying in his mind. She said someone hurt her. He shook his head, trying to dismiss it. Lily was a child with a vivid imagination. Maybe the stress of losing her grandmother was causing her to imagine things. But deep down, something about her words unsettled him. As the ceremony ended, people began to walk back to the church hall for the reception. Lily stayed close to James, her small hand clutching his tightly. She hadn't spoken again, but James could tell she had more to say. At the reception, the atmosphere lightened slightly. People shared stories about the grandmother, laughing softly at fond memories. Lily sat quietly at a table with her bear, her face serious. James brought her a small plate of food, hoping to distract her. "Here you go, sweetheart. Try to eat a little," he said, placing the plate in front of her. Lily looked up at him, her eyes wide and filled with determination. "Daddy, I need to tell you what Grandma said," she insisted. James sighed and sat down next to her. "Okay, Lily. What did she say?" Lily leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. Grandma said someone gave her something that made her sick. She said it wasn't an accident. James froze, his heart pounding. Lily, are you sure that's what you heard? Maybe you misunderstood. Lily shook her head firmly. I'm sure, Daddy. She said I had to tell you. She said you would know what to do. James stared at her, unsure of how to respond. It was a strange thing for a child to say, but Lily looked so certain. Her words felt too specific to be the result of a random dream. Lily, dreams can feel real sometimes, but they aren't. Grandma was very sick for a long time. No one hurt her, James said gently, trying to reassure her. Lily frowned, but Grandma wasn't wrong. She told me to tell you because she was scared. James rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the conversation. Okay, Lily, let's not talk about this here. We'll talk about it later, I promise. Lily hesitated, then nodded slowly. She went back to playing with her bear, but her expression remained serious. As the reception continued, James couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He started to pay closer attention to the people around him. He noticed his older brother, Roger, sitting alone in the corner, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Roger had always been distant, but his behavior today seemed especially odd. James tried to brush it off, but then he noticed something else. A few family members were exchanging hushed whispers, their faces tense. It wasn't unusual for people to gossip at gatherings, but this felt different, secretive. James glanced back at Lily, who was now drawing in a notebook. Her earlier words echoed in his mind again. Grandma said someone hurt her. The unease in his chest grew stronger. For the first time, James wondered if Lily might be right. The reception grew livelier as people shared stories and laughed quietly, trying to push away the sadness. James stood by the dessert table, keeping an eye on Lily as she played with a few other children. He still couldn't stop thinking about her words. Grandma said someone hurt her. He tried to convince himself it was just a child's imagination, but something about her tone had felt too real. James turned back to the room and spotted his brother, Roger, sitting alone at a corner table. Roger seemed lost in thought, staring at his drink. He looked up briefly, his eyes darting around the room, but he avoided meeting James's gaze. Roger's always been like that, James thought to himself. But even as he tried to dismiss it, he couldn't help noticing how nervous Roger looked. Meanwhile, Lily, still clutching her stuffed bear, suddenly stood up. She marched across the room, her little face serious. James watched, curious, as she stopped in the middle of the gathering and looked around at everyone. Then, in a loud, clear voice, she said, "Grandma told me someone hurt her." The room went silent. All eyes turned to Lily. People froze mid-conversation, their expressions a mix of confusion and shock. James's heart sank, and he rushed toward her. "Lily, honey, what are you doing?" he said, gently putting his hands on her shoulders. "She told me last night, Daddy," Lily said, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "She said she didn't die because she was sick. Someone gave her something bad." The murmurs began immediately. Relatives exchanged uneasy glances, and some whispered to each other. A few people frowned, clearly uncomfortable. James knelt down to Lily's level. "Lily, we talked about this. It was just a dream," he said quietly, hoping to calm her. But Lily shook her head. "It wasn't a dream. She told me she couldn't rest until I told you." At that moment, Roger stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Everyone turned to look at him. His face was pale, and his hands trembled as he grabbed his jacket. "I think I've had enough for today," Roger muttered, heading for the door. James watched him leave, his unease growing stronger. Why was Roger in such a hurry to leave? A cousin, Carla, stepped forward, trying to smooth over the awkward situation. "Kids have wild imaginations," she said with a forced laugh. "It's just her way of dealing with grief." But Lily wasn't done. She turned to Carla and pointed. "Grandma told me you were in her house the day before she got sick." Carla froze, her face turning red. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "You were in her room," Lily said firmly. The room fell into a tense silence again. James's mind raced. How could Lily know that? Carla hadn't mentioned visiting their mother, and neither had anyone else. James looked around the room, his stomach twisting. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. "All right," he said, standing and pulling Lily close. "Everyone, let's calm down. We'll figure this out." But as he spoke, he couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in his chest. Could Lily's words actually be true? The tension in the room lingered long after Roger left. Lily stayed close to James, her small hand gripping his tightly. Her bold claim had silenced the family, and now the air was thick with unease. People avoided eye contact, and conversations turned into nervous whispers. James led Lily to a quieter corner and knelt beside her. "Lily, sweetheart, I need you to tell me everything. What exactly did Grandma say to you?" Lily's voice was soft but steady. "She said someone gave her something bad, and that's why she got sick. She told me I had to tell you because you would believe her." James frowned. "Did she say who it was?" Lily hesitated, hugging her bear tightly. "No, but she said it happened in her room, and she was scared." James nodded slowly, his mind racing. He didn't want to scare Lily further, but her words felt too specific to ignore. Later, as the family gathered to say their goodbyes, James noticed Carla sitting alone by the window. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled as she sipped her coffee. Normally, Carla was talkative and lively, but today she seemed withdrawn. James decided to approach her. "Hey, Carla, can we talk for a minute?" Carla looked up, startled. Sure," she said, setting down her cup. James lowered his voice. "Lily mentioned something about you being at Mom's house the day before she got sick. Is that true?" Carla's eyes widened, and she stammered. I stopped by to drop off some groceries. That's all. Why are you asking?" James studied her face. "She said she saw you in Mom's room. Did you talk to her?" Carla's hands fidgeted in her lap. "Not really. She was resting. So I just left the groceries in the kitchen and went home." Her answer sounded reasonable, but James couldn't shake the feeling that she was holding something back. "All right," he said, stepping back. "Thanks for letting me know." As he walked away, James's thoughts swirled. Carla's reaction felt off, but he didn't have enough to go on. That evening, after most of the guests had left, James went into his mother's room at her house. He hadn't been in there since she passed, and the sight of her belongings brought a wave of emotion. The scent of her lavender perfume still lingered, and her favorite book rested on the nightstand. James sat on the bed and opened the drawer of the nightstand. Inside, he found a small notebook. Flipping through it, he noticed pages filled with her neat handwriting. One entry caught his attention. "Feeling uneasy today. Roger and Carla came by. Something felt off, but I can't put my finger on it. They kept asking about my will. I told them it's private." James's heart sank as he read the words. His mother had felt uneasy, and now Lily was saying someone had hurt her. Could there be a connection? He took a deep breath and closed the notebook, his resolve hardening. Whatever the truth was, he had to find it. James knew he couldn't ignore Lily's words anymore. Something wasn't right, and it was time to dig deeper. The next morning, James couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in his chest. The notebook he'd found in his mother's room kept replaying in his mind, especially the part about Roger and Carla asking about her will. It wasn't like his mother to write down feelings of doubt, so it had to mean something. Lily sat at the kitchen table, her bear beside her as she drew in her notebook. She glanced up at James and said, "Daddy, are we going to talk about Grandma?" James nodded. "Yes, Lily. I need to figure out what's going on. But first, I need you to tell me exactly what she told you in your dream." Lily put her pencil down and took a deep breath. "She said she didn't feel safe. She said someone gave her something that made her sick. She said it was in her tea." James froze. Tea. His mother drank tea every night before bed. Lily's words felt too specific to ignore now. Later that day, James decided to visit Roger. He knew his brother would be defensive, but he had to ask questions. Roger lived alone in a small house on the edge of town. When James knocked on the door, it took a few moments for Roger to answer. "James, what are you doing here?" Roger asked, his voice sharp. "I need to talk to you about Mom," James said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Roger looked annoyed but didn't stop him. "What about her? We already said goodbye." James crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. "Lily said something at the funeral. She said Mom told her in a dream that someone hurt her." Roger's face went pale. "You're really going to believe the ramblings of a kid?" James didn't back down. "Lily knew things she shouldn't. She said Mom mentioned tea. Did you ever make tea for her when you visited?" Roger hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking his head. "No, I barely visited her. I was busy with work." James didn't believe him. "Mom wrote in her notebook that you and Carla were asking about her will. What was that about?" Roger's jaw tightened. "You're reading too much into this, James. Mom was old. She was sick. That's all there is to it." But James wasn't convinced. "Why did you leave the funeral so quickly yesterday? You looked like you couldn't get out fast enough." Roger glared at him. "Because I didn't want to deal with everyone's drama. I've got my own life, James. I don't have to explain myself to you." James stood his ground. "If you're hiding something, I'll find out." Roger's face darkened. "Leave, James. Now." James left, but his suspicion only grew stronger. Roger's reaction was defensive, almost panicked. Back home, James called Carla next. She answered after a few rings, her voice shaky. "James, why are you calling me?" "We need to talk," he said. "Lily mentioned tea. Did you ever make tea for Mom?" Carla didn't answer right away. "Why are you asking me that?" she finally said, her voice trembling. James's grip tightened on the phone. "Because I think you know something you're not saying." Carla hung up abruptly, leaving James more determined than ever. Something was wrong, and it was time to uncover the truth. James sat at his kitchen table, staring at the notebook he had taken from his mother's room. The words she had written swirled in his mind. He thought about Roger's defensiveness and Carla's shaky voice when she hung up the phone. Something wasn't right, and James was determined to find out what it was. Lily came into the room, holding her stuffed bear. "Daddy, are you going to figure out what happened to Grandma?" she asked softly. James smiled at her, though worry still lingered in his eyes. "Yes, Lily, I promise I will." He spent the rest of the day going through his mother's belongings. He found receipts, notes, and even her old recipe book, but nothing seemed unusual. Just as he was about to give up, he found a small envelope tucked behind a framed photo of his mother and the family. The envelope was sealed, but James could see his name written on the front in his mother's handwriting. His heart raced as he carefully opened it. Inside was a letter. "Dear James, if you're reading this, it means I was right to feel uneasy. I love my family, but I've been feeling unsafe around some of them lately. Roger and Carla have been asking strange questions about my will and my finances. They've also been unusually insistent on making my tea when they visit. I may be overthinking, but I feel I need to write this down, just in case something happens to me. You've always been my rock, James. If anything seems wrong, trust your instincts. Love always, Mom." James's hands trembled as he finished reading. His mother had felt unsafe. She had noticed strange behavior from Roger and Carla. The mention of tea sent chills down his spine. Lily's words weren't just a child's imagination. They matched his mother's concerns. He knew he needed help. He called his close friend Mike, who was a local police officer. James explained everything. Lily's dream, the notebook, and now the letter. Mike listened carefully. "James, this is serious. If your mom suspected something, we need to look into it. Do you still have the tea she used to drink?" James nodded. "It's in her kitchen. I didn't throw anything away after she passed. Mike arrived an hour later. Together, they went through the kitchen and found the box of tea on the counter. Mike carefully placed it in an evidence bag. We'll test this. If there's anything unusual, we'll know. James felt a small sense of relief. At least something was being done. Later that evening, James received a call from Carla. Her voice was shaky. James, I need to talk to you. Can we meet tomorrow? James agreed, his suspicion growing. Why was Carla reaching out now? As he hung up, Lily came to sit beside him. Daddy, do you think Grandma's okay now? James put an arm around her. I think Grandma is depending on us, Lily, and we're going to make sure she's okay. The night felt heavy with anticipation. Tomorrow, James knew he would be one step closer to the truth. The next morning, James drove to the cafe where he was supposed to meet Carla. The air was crisp, and the leaves rustled in the breeze, but James felt none of the peacefulness of the day. His mind was racing with questions. Why had Carla called him? And why now? Carla was already seated at a small table in the corner when James arrived. She looked nervous, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. James sat down across from her, his expression serious. Thanks for meeting me, Carla said softly, her voice barely audible over the quiet hum of the cafe. What's going on, Carla? James asked, getting straight to the point. Carla hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if she were afraid someone might overhear. I've been feeling guilty, she finally said. James leaned forward, his heart pounding. Guilty about what? Carla swallowed hard. About the way things happened with your mom. Roger and I. We were trying to convince her to change her will. But I swear, I didn't mean for anything bad to happen. James's eyes narrowed. What do you mean bad to happen? What did you do, Carla? Tears welled up in Carla's eyes. It wasn't me. Roger. He said he had a plan to convince her. He made her tea the night before she got sick. I didn't know what he put in it, James. I swear I didn't. James's stomach dropped. Carla's words confirmed his worst fears. Roger had done something to their mother. Why didn't you say anything sooner? James asked, his voice filled with frustration. I was scared, Carla said, her voice breaking. Roger said if anyone found out, it would ruin everything. James stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Carla, you need to come with me to the police. This can't stay a secret. Carla nodded reluctantly, wiping her tears. Okay, I'll go. On the way to the police station, James called Mike to let him know they were coming. As he explained what Carla had told him, Mike's tone grew serious. James, this is enough for us to act. I'll meet you at the station. When they arrived, Carla gave a full statement to the police. She admitted to being involved in pressuring their mother, but insisted she didn't know the full extent of Roger's actions. While they were still at the station, Mike's phone buzzed. He stepped out to answer it and returned a few minutes later, his expression grim. We tested the tea, Mike said. It contained traces of a substance that could have caused your mom's symptoms. This is now a criminal investigation. James's chest tightened. It was real. His mother hadn't died naturally. Roger had done something to her. Mike nodded to another officer, who immediately put out a call to bring Roger in for questioning. As James sat in the station, his phone buzzed. It was Lily. Daddy, did you find out what happened? James took a deep breath. Yes, Lily. You were right. We're making sure Grandma gets justice. That night, as James drove home, he couldn't help but feel both relief and anger. The truth was finally coming to light, and it all started with Lily's innocent but powerful words. The next morning, James woke up to a call from Mike. We brought Roger in for questioning last night. He's refusing to talk, but we have enough evidence to keep digging, Mike said. James sat on the edge of his bed, holding his breath. What happens now? Mike's voice was firm. We'll search his house and see if we can find anything that links him to your mom's tea or her death. I'll keep you updated. After hanging up, James sat in silence for a moment. The reality of everything was sinking in. His own brother might have hurt their mother, and now the entire family was tangled in a web of guilt and suspicion. Lily came into the room, rubbing her eyes. "Did they find out what happened to Grandma?" she asked, her voice still groggy from sleep. James pulled her into a hug. "They're working on it, sweetheart. You've been so brave through all of this." Later that day, James received another call from Mike. "We found something," Mike said. "Roger had a small bottle of the same substance we found in your mom's tea. It was hidden in his garage." James felt a mix of anger and sadness. How could Roger do something like this? That evening, Mike came to James's house to talk. "We're building a strong case," Mike explained. "Roger's fingerprints are on the tea box, and the bottle we found matches the substance in your mom's system. We're also pulling up financial records to see if money was a motive." James nodded, though the weight of the situation felt heavier than ever. "What about Carla? She said she didn't know what Roger was planning." Mike sighed. "She's cooperating, and her story matches the evidence so far. It seems like Roger was the one who took things too far." As Mike spoke, James couldn't help but think about the notebook and the letter his mother had left for him. She had trusted him to protect her even after she was gone. The next morning, James decided to visit his mother's grave. He brought Lily with him, feeling like they both needed a moment of closure. The cemetery was quiet, and the autumn leaves rustled gently in the wind. Lily knelt by the grave, placing her stuffed bear next to the headstone. "Grandma, we're helping you," she whispered. James stood silently for a moment before speaking. "Mom, I wish I had known sooner. I'm so sorry this happened to you, but I promise we'll make sure the truth comes out." As they walked back to the car, James felt a sense of determination. His mother had trusted him, and he wouldn't let her down. That evening, the police announced Roger's arrest. The news spread quickly among the family, shocking everyone. Some relatives were in disbelief, while others admitted they had noticed Roger acting strangely in the months leading up to their mother's death. James sat with Lily that night, holding her close. "Grandma would be so proud of you," he said softly. Lily looked up at him. "I just wanted to help her rest, Daddy." "You did, Lily," James said with a small smile. "You did more than anyone could have expected." But even as they found some peace, James knew the journey wasn't over yet. Justice was coming, and his family would never be the same. The days following Roger's arrest were a whirlwind. James spent hours answering calls from family members, each of them shocked and trying to process what had happened. Some refused to believe Roger could have done such a thing, while others admitted they had always sensed something was off about him. James stayed focused on Lily and the promise he had made to his mother. He wanted justice, not just for her, but for Lily, who had bravely spoken up when no one else had. One afternoon, Mike called with an update. "James, it's done." Roger confessed during questioning. James's heart stopped. "What did he say?" Mike's tone was calm but firm. "He admitted to tampering with your mom's tea. He said he thought it would make her sick enough to agree to change her will, but he didn't expect it to go as far as it did." James clenched his fists, anger bubbling up inside him. So it was all about money. Mike sighed. "Unfortunately, yes. He was in debt and saw your mom's inheritance as a way out. Carla's story checks out. She didn't know about the tea. Roger acted alone." James closed his eyes, a wave of sadness washing over him. His brother's greed had taken their mother's life. The next day, James attended the court hearing, where Roger's charges were officially announced. Seeing his brother in handcuffs was surreal. Roger avoided eye contact, his face a mix of shame and regret. After the hearing, James took Lily to the park. It was a sunny day, and the laughter of children playing filled the air. Lily held James's hand tightly as they walked along a path lined with trees. "Is Uncle Roger going to jail?" Lily asked quietly. James nodded. "Yes, he is. What he did was very wrong. and he has to take responsibility for it. Lily looked down at her feet. Do you think Grandma is happy now? James stopped walking and knelt in front of her. I think Grandma is very proud of you, Lily. You were so brave. Because of you, we found the truth, and now she can rest peacefully. Lily gave him a small smile. I just wanted to help. You did, sweetheart, James said, pulling her into a hug. You helped more than anyone else could. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal. James worked on repairing relationships with his other family members, focusing on the good memories of his mother rather than the pain of what had happened. At home, he placed the notebook and letter from his mother in a special box, along with Lily's stuffed bear. It was a way to honor his mother's memory and the courage it had taken to uncover the truth. One evening, as James tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at him with a curious expression. Do you think Grandma knows we love her? James smiled and kissed her forehead. I know she does, Lily. She always knew. As Lily drifted off to sleep, James sat by the window, looking out at the stars. Despite everything, he felt a sense of peace. His mother's love had been the thread that tied their family together, and even in her absence, it continued to guide them. Justice had been served, and his mother's legacy would live on in their hearts forever.